Everything in Northern Ireland was fixed by the Good Friday Agreement. That sounds nice, and it's complete rubbish. The truth is far more uncomfortable. Northern Ireland ended a war, but it never finished the conflict. And if you've ever felt like old arguments never really go away, whether in politics, families, or even your own life, then this story will hit closer to home than you might expect. And there's one moment in particular, buried in the 1970s, that changed everything. And most people don't even know it happened. But we'll come back to that. Welcome back to the war. Northern Ireland didn't just fall into violence, it was built into a pressure cooker. When Ireland was partitioned in 1921, the North remained part of the United Kingdom. On paper, it looked tidy. In reality, it created a state with two communities locked into the same space, but dreaming of two different futures. Most Protestants wanted to stay British, most Catholics wanted to be Irish, and one side controlled almost everything. For decades, the Protestant Unionist majority dominated politics, housing, policing, and jobs. Catholic communities were often pushed into poorer areas, given worse housing, and had little political power. That resentment built quietly, year after year, until it finally exploded in the late 1960s. Civil marches began, inspired by the American Civil Rights Movement. Catholics weren't asking for revolution, they were asking for fair votes, fair housing and fair treatment. But instead of reform, many marches were met with violence from loyalists and a heavy-handed police force. And that's when the British Army arrived. At first, many Catholics welcomed them. They saw British soldiers as protection against loyalist attacks. But that honeymoon didn't last, and the reason why is one of the most important turning points in the entire conflict. We'll get there. Because once the army got involved, everything changed. Riots turned into shootings, protests turned into bombings, and Northern Ireland slid into what became known as the Troubles, a conflict that would last nearly 30 years and kill over 3,500 people. But here's the part people miss. This wasn't just chaos. It became a war of strategy, intelligence and control, and both sides were learning very quickly. But before we get to how the violence escalated, let me ask you something. If you believe your identity, your culture and your future were being erased, how far would you go to stop it? Hold that thought. By the early 1970s, Northern Ireland was spiralling. The provisional IRA emerged, claiming they were defending Catholic communities and fighting to remove British rule. Loyalist paramilitaries formed to fight back, and the British Army was caught in the middle, trying to keep order while becoming a target themselves. By 1971, the British government introduced internment without trial, meaning suspected militants could be arrested and held indefinitely without evidence or court hearings. It was meant to crush the IRA. Instead, it poured petrol onto the fire. Most of those arrested were Catholic, many were innocent, and suddenly entire communities saw the British Army not as protectors but as occupiers. Then, in January 1972, everything broke. British soldiers opened fire on unarmed civil rights marchers in Derry. 13 people were killed that day. Another later died from his wounds. You know this as Bloody Sunday. And here's the brutal truth. That single event did more to boost the IRA than any recruitment poster ever could. Young men who had never touched a weapon suddenly felt they had no choice. This was the moment Britain lost control and the moral high ground. And from here, the conflict became far more dangerous. Bombings hit London, assassinations spread across Northern Ireland, and the British military realised they weren't fighting a normal enemy, they were fighting an invisible one. Which leads us to the Shadow War that almost no one talks about. By the late 1970s, Britain quietly changed tactics. Instead of flooding streets with troops, they turned to intelligence surveillance and special units. The goal wasn't to arrest the IRA, it was to penetrate it. MI5, Special Branch, and elite units like the SAS built networks of informers inside paramilitary groups. They tracked phone calls, watched safe houses, and quietly mapped entire terrorist networks. And here's the uncomfortable part. Some of those informers were involved in killings. Some attacks were allowed to happen to protect intelligence sources. Some people were never warned. This wasn't about justice anymore, it was about control. The British state decided it was better to manage the violence than risk losing its grip on the war. And it worked. By the late 1980s and early 90s, the IRA was deeply compromised. Senior leaders were being watched, operations were being intercepted, their ability to wage war was shrinking, which raises a chilling question. If the IRA was being quietly beaten, why did the fighting continue? Because the war wasn't just about guns, it was about identity, and that can't be defeated by surveillance. By the late 1990s, both sides were exhausted. The IRA knew it couldn't win militarily, the British government knew it couldn't bomb its way to peace, and the public on both sides had enough. This led to secret talks, back-channel negotiations, and eventually the Good Friday Agreement in 1998. It was historic. The IRA agreed to decommission weapons. Unionists agreed to share power. The border between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland became invisible, and for the first time in decades, the violence largely stopped. But remember what I said at the start. The war ended, the conflict didn't. Because peace deals don't erase fear. They don't undo identity, and they don't heal old wounds. They just freeze them in place. And that's why Northern Ireland today still feels uneasy, like a room that looks calm, but everyone remembers the last time it caught fire. Here's the part most people outside the UK don't realise. Northern Ireland is still deeply divided. Neighbourhoods are still separated by peace walls, actual physical barriers between Catholic and Protestant areas. Some are higher today than they were during the war. Children still grow up in largely separate schools. Politics is still split along identity lines, and every parade, flag or border issue still carries explosive symbolism. Then came Brexit. When the UK left the EU, it created a massive problem. Where do you put the border between the UK and the EU? A hard border between the Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland risked reopening old wounds. So instead, a trade border was placed in the Irish Sea between Northern Ireland and the rest of the UK. To many Unionists, that felt like betrayal. Suddenly the old question came roaring back. Are we British, or are we slowly being pushed into Ireland? And that's why unrest still flares up today, because the identity question was never truly settled, only paused. Northern Ireland isn't just a story about the past, it's a warning about what happens when people feel unheard, unseen, and trapped inside systems they never choose. A peace deal can stop bullets, but it takes generations to stop bitterness. Now go check out our video on the Paras versus the US paratroopers. Hi soldiers, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, leave your thoughts in the comments, and check out our merchant membership programs. And don't forget to check back in again soon. That's an order.